I was tipped off. Do not be out downtown at night. The Brussels police have all got your photograph. You will get picked up and they will find drugs in your pocket.
Really?
And I walked through the door and 300 police officers all turned around and stared at me. It was extraordinary.
Hello, Mark Homer here, and I have got a supremely special guest for you today, Nigel Farage. We're going to go into all sorts of detail around Brexit, immigration, we're going to talk about property, stocks, Boris, the whole lot's on the podcast. Now, before we get started, make sure you like and subscribe. I've got an extra special podcast today and guest Nigel Farage. I feel really, really honoured. I watch Nigel, 7 o'clock, it's a staple for me, every evening, GB News, on to Talking Pints. His politics really, really chime with me. Nigel, welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for being a fan of GB News. I think we are, it's very interesting, isn't it? Since GB News launched, we're seeing all the other broadcast channels changing their formats, getting more presenter-led opinion shows, getting more genuine debate. So I think actually, GB News already is beginning to change the landscape of British broadcasting.
And I understand your viewing numbers are really starting to reflect that.
Yeah, and they're much more consistent across the day. I mean, it's not easy to measure because, Barb is the official rating. And I always think, well, would you have a spy box in your, in your living room?
Oh, you have to have that. I never knew how
that's how the official figures are done.
Right.
So I always think to some extent, it's difficult to completely trust the figures, but the figures are the figures. That's the industry norm. But as you well know, people watch it on the app, they watch it on catch up, they can now listen to it in the car. It's on DAB, GB News Radio. So how you measure, 25 years ago, it was who was watching it live, and that's still very, very important for the business model of GB News. But there are so many other ways that people now consume news. But look, it launched last June. It had some hiccups to begin with, but then, name me a startup that doesn't have difficulties and hiccups. But no, I feel the content that it's putting out now across the shows is interesting, it's varied, and I think you genuinely do get both sides of the argument.
And I think you've got a whole swathe of sort of maybe the silent majority who are watching it. I'd have my stepfather at home, and quite a few of the friends who would tune in 7 o'clock every night. They, and various other times during the day. And they're, I suppose, a little bit like talk radio. They're getting, an alternative, or maybe something that chimes with their views.
Well, I think one thing that is for certain is that on the NHS mandate, the idea after what we'd seen in the care homes, where 30 to 40,000 people left the care industry, and when it was mandated that all the NHS staff would have to have the vaccine, it's about 100,000 people who hadn't had it, and there was a very famous exchange between Sajid Javid and a doctor at King's Hospital.
Well, I watched you had him on.
And I had him on the show, and there were numerous presenters at GB News, albeit, again, giving both sides of the argument, but personal opinions strongly suggesting this was a mistake, it was wrong. We then saw, over various COVID measures, 100 backbench Tory MPs rebel. There's no vaccine mandate, and all restrictions have been lifted. And I think, do you know what? For once, a free press and our parliamentary system, it's actually worked. I mean, it's rather nice, isn't it? So yeah, I do think that I think broadcasters have a great responsibility, but I think if they get it right, they can have a very significant influence.
But of course, you've done this with a few issues, haven't you? You've I don't know, you have this uncanny knack of being able to sort of sense which way the political wind will be blowing in, say, 6 months, 12 months' time. There was...
Which is not pure base opportunism, I can assure you of that. These are about things that I believe, but timing of campaigns, when you really push hard, that's about judgment. And yes, that is about not just thinking, what are people thinking now, it's what are they going to be thinking a few months down the road.
So, you've got the sort of EU, the I don't know, were the public that against the EU, I don't know, maybe a decade ago? You sensed, there was discord and it was going to grow?
I did. If you were a small manufacturer, making small electrical goods, the EU had already made your life a nightmare. If you were one of Britain's under 10 metre fishermen, the EU had already impacted directly on your life. For many other people, when you talk to them, they say, well, look, Nigel, I get it, we shouldn't really be run from Brussels, but do you know what? My job's okay, I'm fine. And it's only, there was a moment when it changed, and that was the unconditional opening of the doors to 8 and then 10 former communist countries. And I thought, these government figures that 13,000 people a year will come.
It's nonsense.
I mean, baloney.
Yeah.
And that was the moment people saw rapid change in their communities. People working in a lot of industries suddenly found that their wages just weren't going up year after year. So that was the moment, and I did see that and predict that, and that made a huge difference.
And of course, there's the sort of energy crisis, which, I mean, I was watching you. People often say after the event, oh, this person predicted X, Y, and Z, but I watched you. This was way ahead. You're talking about the green levy, you were talking about this looming sort of increase in energy costs that were coming, and the political backlash that would stem from it. And we're here with the energy costs, and I suspect, there's going to be a groundswell of public opinion. People are going to get upset. Their bills are just about to go up a lot once the cap comes off, and then they're probably going to get upset with, I don't know, zero, green levies and sort of.
I first kicked off on this really properly in 2013. It was the English local elections, and government was compulsorily purchasing land all around the country, putting up wind farms. Other rich landowners were only too pleased to get £1,000 a day or more.
We've got a biomass boiler.
Yeah.
It's sort of...
Well, but here's the irony of all the net zero stuff, is the biggest biomass boiler is called the Drax Power Station, where they burn 7 million trees every year.
I've never understood it. We run this biomass boiler in a block of flats, and a load of wood pellets come in a lorry once a month, and they fill this huge hopper up, and then we burn it, and there's a huge chimney, and that sort of goes into the environment.
And we call that green. Yeah.
I don't get it.
It's been very difficult, some of this stuff, because you argue that net zero is a ridiculous objective, it's an act of national self-harm, and you're told, because everybody's been riled up by this Swedish teenager, is it Saint Greta? And you're told that actually you're a denier, all these things get thrown at you. Well, actually, I mean, I've been an environmentalist, a sensible environmentalist, all my life. But when you actually look at what we're now doing, just because you export the production of coal, gas, steel, chemicals, much of our refining, because you export all of that to another country and then import the goods back in, the net effect on global CO2 is up, not down.
It's nuts.
And it's nuts, and it makes no sense at all. And we're beginning to understand, I think, that the more wind farms we build, the more gas we need as a backup. And I think there's a strategic argument, which is we take 9% of our electricity comes from France through an interconnector. 50% of our gas comes in from Qatar, Norway, a little bit from Russia. Increasingly oil we're importing, because some big developments in the North Sea, the Cambo oil field was scrapped recently. Why? Well, because the administrations in Edinburgh and London are increasingly against the industry.
But I guess that's about to sort of change a little bit, is it?
Well, you'd have thought logically with what's happening in Ukraine that it would change and there'd be a rethink. So I'm arguing strategically we should not be a net importer of energy. We've actually got all the resources to be a net exporter of energy. So self-sufficiency in energy. Whether it's fracking or whether it's another method of natural gas extraction, it seems to me we've got an industry here that could provide in the northwest of England tens of thousands of well-paid jobs. Now that, Boris, is what I call levelling up.
Is he really interested in that, though? Is he? Because
the thing is, I don't know what he's really interested in. We know he likes being the boss, and we know he loves all that. What does he really believe in?
Nobody seems to be able to tell me.
Least of all him.
No.
I mean, he is your classic, sort of chameleon, career politician. But he's very good at spreading a bit of optimism. He's very good at the right time spreading a bit of joy. And given how joyless so many of our leaders have been over the last few decades, I kind of get it. And I think in 2019, he was the right person for that moment. Somebody, it needed it. It needed a Conservative majority. We needed to leave the EU. And we can argue about whether we're taking the full benefits of it. There's a separate debate. But he was the right man for then. Whether he's the right man going ahead, I very much doubt.
Months before we had the lockdown, you had the South African head of the Medical Association on, Angelique Coetzee, who I watched her on your show and on others every week, almost every night. She was coming on. She was saying, "This is mild. This is not going to be. We've got loads of cases here. We're way ahead. We've got the data." She was completely ignored, and
it was astonishing. I mean, I also thanked her. I said, because unlike the Chinese, who took a long time to tell us what was going on, the South Africans identified this, informed the world exactly what it was, what its profile and makeup was. And then, as I say, in a country that was 75% unvaccinated, she explained how mild its symptoms were. Becomes sort of nature's way of actually us getting through the other end of this. And the odd thing was, within a few weeks of me talking to her, Boris Johnson addressed the nation on a Sunday night and used the word emergency 4 times.
I remember it.
They were all getting ready to lock us down again. And then the rebellion began. And the rebellion began through some outspoken people in journalism just saying, whoa, this is bonkers. And some very principled Conservative backbenchers, 100 of them, standing up and protesting. So do we give Boris credit for the fact that all restrictions in England have been lifted? Well,
he sort of ignored the naysayers in the end.
In the end, he did.
Because they all start, the scientists, they are worried about a public health emergency, I'm sure they are, but you have to wonder how much of this is them wanting to sort of bolster their position, gain some sort of importance. And this is just leverage. As soon as this sort of thing starts, and she was there with you gave her the.
I know. No, she got it absolutely right. She was
bang on, and no one's talking about it now.
Yeah, no. She really does deserve a medal. Actually,
she really does.
She really does. I can't bear the thought of the Brothers Grimm. Witty and balanced. I can't bear the thought of seeing them again.
You could bloody see it all, couldn't you? This winter again, they get.
Well, we'll see. I think we've reached a point now with this.
No more lockdowns?
Oh, it's not going to happen again.
You think we're done?
All right. Yeah. And the great thing is, well, credit to Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis in Florida proved there were different ways of doing this, far more than Sweden did even. So DeSantis deserves great credit. But of all the countries, we are the first now to come out of restrictions. And this just a few days after Justin Trudeau has behaved in the most authoritarian way in Canada.
Bizarre, wasn't it?
Horrid.
Yeah.
Threatening to take people's pets and euthanize them. And euthanize them. Yeah. Freezing bank accounts.
What?
Smashing the windows of lorries to actually get into the lorries to tow them away and get the protesters out. So, these people that call themselves liberal are actually the most illiberal people. So I think we can say, there were lots of mistakes made over the course of the last 2 years, and at times the government looked like it was following far more than it was leading, and it was sort of zigzagging all over the place. But in the end, we've got it right, and we are leading the way, and we should be pleased.
And you think that when we look back on this, you think, the court of, the final analysis will say that loads of mistakes were made, lockdowns actually were not the right thing to do.
I think the long-term view will be that the initial lockdowns, we had little choice. We saw what was happening.
March 2020.
Yeah, we saw what was happening in Milano. We'd no idea about this virus. It was completely new to us. I don't think history would judge that badly or harshly. The fact that it went on forever and kept coming back. I think the long-term effects, and we have seen the Johns Hopkins University study suggesting that actually people's private behaviour did more to reduce transmission than any government diktats. And I think the long-term health effects, the millions of people who've not been screened for diabetes, the vast numbers of people whose cancer diagnoses have been missed, the number of kids whose normal development and education has been seriously hampered by this.
It's never on the screen. You know, you get this sort of graph. It shows all the people in, you know, who've got the virus and all the people who are in hospital and all the deaths. But where's the cost-benefit analysis?
Well,
where's the line down the screen with...
It's not that easy to do because we're dealing with subjectives. You know, I talked about children's development as young human beings. Quite difficult to measure things like that. You know, how do you measure... And mental health, I sometimes think we overuse the term mental health, but I think out of this pandemic, there are a lot of people who've been through a desperately difficult time.
What is it, a quarter, 30% have a phobia now? Because of something?
Yeah.
Because of lockdown?
I mean, look, there were 2 types of lockdown, weren't there? I mean, for those of us lucky enough to have gardens, not to live in the centre of busy cities.
Boris?
But I'm being honest. I mean, that first April, the weather was amazing. But if you were stuck on the 19th floor of a high-rise block in East London with 3 kids, I mean, it must have been pretty blooming awful.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
So I think the long term, you know, when we look back in the long term at this, we'll say it did more damage than good.
So you're often right about this stuff. So where does this ability, this crystal ball gazing ability, where does it come from?
Well, I'm not much good at anything else. I mean, the skill in life, I think the great thing in life is to try and find what you're good at. And if you're lucky enough to find what you're good at, stick to that. But I do think, on a good day, I do have a reasonable sense of how, if you like, Middle England, how have you got to put this? No offence to Welsh voters or anybody else, but you know what I mean. I think I generally have quite a good sense of how people are thinking about things and will think about things. And you know, you're not going to be right every time, but I do have a good sense of it. I also understand, after 20 years in the European Parliament, I completely understand how vast the disconnect between the Westminster political classes and their colleagues in the media. And by the way, they're all interchangeable. You know, 1 minute you're a journalist, next minute you're a politician, and kind of back and forth. They're all interrelated. The number of intermarriages that go on in relationships are extraordinary. They spend their weeks together. They spend their weekends together. Nobody has a hobby. No hobbies. No one plays golf or collects stamps or has a huge passion. No. I mean, these are really, really, in the main, a pretty dull bunch of people, in my opinion. And they are part of something called groupthink. They finish up agreeing with each other on virtually everything. I just don't think we'd have got to net zero, as a modern example, if that wasn't the case. So I think I understand that disconnect, and perhaps it's that, more than anything else, that I've got right once or twice.
We've got other friends elsewhere, your friends in America and all your sort of business contacts, and you're very interested in small business.
Yeah, I mean, I had a life before politics, and I didn't pursue politics for a career. That was never the objective. You know, in fact, I couldn't wait to get out, really. Once we'd achieved the main aim, I went into politics with a purpose, I went into politics with a mission, whereas most people, not all, but most people in politics are there, and it's, you know, when they're at university, it's what they want to do as their career. They do it for their lives. So actually quite a relief to see some of the 2019 Conservative intake aren't from that background. There's some quite interesting...
I didn't realise that.
There's some quite interesting characters that have come. I mean, there's a guy called Lee Anderson, Ashfield, up in Nottinghamshire. He's now an MP. He was a coal miner. He's sitting as a Conservative MP.
Was he on last night?
He intervened in a debate in the House of Commons.
Yes.
Yeah, and he said, with no more lockdowns, he said, no more lockdowns. He said, in future, the only people that should be protected and kept away from society are the vulnerable, the elderly, and the Labour front bench.
It made me chuckle.
It really made me chuckle. And it said something. Here was somebody who'd come into politics with a passion. It wasn't scripted. It was off the... Well, he might have thought about it before, but it wasn't reading off a sheet of news, a sheet of paper. He was actually getting up and doing it, and it was just such a relief to see.
So you touched on the European Parliament. You know, 2010, you stood up and you said that the President of the European Council had the appearance of a damp rag, and and the
charisma of a damp rag and the appearance
of a low-grade bank clerk.
Where did that come from?
And in 2016, the "You're Not Laughing Now" speech. What sort of, I can't imagine after something like that, you're standing at the water cooler with all of these sort of colleagues, if that's what
No, they weren't colleagues.
No?
No.
I mean, do you
the hatred towards me.
Do you end up in the boiler room cupboard as an office? Are they spiking your drinks? How can you then coexist with these people?
There were, of course, decent people
yeah.
who were European federalists who accepted I had a different point of view. But they were in the minority. In the main, this was their religion. And I was there in the temple, daring to blaspheme in this way. So generally, the behaviour of the other MEPs towards me was beastly. The behaviour towards me in Brussels, astonishing. There was a shop opposite the Parliament, and I used to go in there quite regularly, 7:30, 20 to 8, get a takeaway coffee, to cross the road and go to the office. And for years I popped and got a coffee and sometimes got a sandwich. And there was one day in 2016, I went in there, ordered a coffee. No, we're not serving it. So the coffee shop wouldn't serve me. My favourite pub, there was a good pub. We found a great little pub, small pub. And UKIP spent a lot of money in that. We really did. And one day the boss just said, "No, I'm sorry, you can't come in anymore. We've been threatened. We've been threatened that if we continue to serve you, we'll lose all the business from all the European institutions."
Really?
Yeah, restaurants wouldn't serve me. So, it really was.
The mafia, isn't it?
It really was. And the police had been told, and this is not a conspiracy theory, after that Van Rompuy speech, that caused uproar. And I was fined for it.
I suppose €4,000 or €5,000 or something. Sorry.
Best PR bill ever, €3,000. Thank you very much. I was tipped off. I was tipped off by somebody who worked close to the bosses of the institutions and told, "Do not be out downtown at night. The Brussels police have all got your photograph. You will get picked up and they will find drugs in your pocket."
Really? It's quite sinister.
And I remember 2 or 3 years later, a big European summit was on, and I was going in to do an interview. And the foyer of this building was the rest room for the off-duty police officers. And I walked through the door, and 300 police officers all turned around and stared at me. Really? It was extraordinary. So it was, it wasn't nice over there. It did feel like combat of a kind. But you know what?
You don't care, do you?
I know, I couldn't care.
You don't care?
No, I don't care. I don't care.
You're pretty thick-skinned, actually.
I don't care. Yeah, it's funny, there's been a book just written about me by Michael Crick. He spent 2 years working on this book. And, he's interviewed a few people who've said disobliging things. Nearly always political people who perhaps thought they were better than me and it didn't work out the way they wanted.
Yeah.
From what I can make out, the book's fair. Because it says this person says that about Nigel, this person says the other. You're the reader, make your own mind up. And yesterday, everyone said to me, "Oh, have you read the book yet? Have you read all these reviews?" I said, no. I couldn't care less. And they go, "No, come on, you have bought a copy really, haven't you?" No, I couldn't care less. And I think there's something there is something in this about just being true to yourself. And I first picked this up in 2014. I was leading UKIP into the European elections, and with about 5 weeks to go, we hit the lead. We were topping the opinion polls.
I remember this.
For the European elections. And I can tell you something, the only thing in life worse than being behind is being ahead. Because your head's up over the parapet and everybody's firing at you. Yeah. And there was a morning, Sunday morning, it was the first time for at least a month that I wasn't up in London doing Sunday morning shows. I was at home. 7:30, the landline rings, Sunday morning. And it's my lawyer. Oh my goodness gracious me, what's this? He said, "Nigel, if you haven't, turned a computer on, if you haven't been out and bought the newspapers, just don't. Just don't. Just don't do it. Just ignore everything. Don't answer the phone. Have a morning off. Have a day off. Just ignore everything they're writing about you. So he said, because if you read this stuff, it'll really start to damage your confidence. And that was the first time. Before that, I kind of, thought, what do they mean by that word? And that was the first time I've been given that advice, and it was actually very, very good advice. That doesn't mean that you close your ears. There are people around you who will say, well, you maybe didn't get that quite right or whatever, and that's fine. Trusted people that say those things to you, trusted people that you listen to. But if you reach a level, particularly in this country, where we do have a much more combative press, but that's a good thing, because we have a press that express a big range of opinions. And I think, it doesn't matter what you do. And I'm sure if you're a Premier League footballer, after a roughish game, the last thing you should do is read the Sunday papers. So, I just don't let it worry me.
So, lots of what you do is, sort of generating some public discourse. I don't know, you might jump onto something and use it as a platform. So, people coming over the channel, living in hotels. Obviously, these vaccine mandates, this was a big thing. I remember the doctor, there was Djokovic in Australia.
Yep.
I remember you went over to Serbia,
I went to join the family, I did, whilst he was incarcerated in Australia. The channel thing's interesting. So it was right at the start of lockdown, and it was clear to me the numbers that were coming were dwarfing the numbers that had come in 2019 and 2018. And yet, literally, there was no coverage. It was not being covered at all by the broadcasters and others. And I could see that effectively we put a sign on the White Cliffs of Dover which said, all welcome. Anyone can come. And so I got onto that because nobody else was doing it.
But it has that is now in the mainstream now. Priti Patel has, she's got pressure to, I don't know whether she is dealing with it, but at least it's being talked about because of your coverage.
I did help make that a proper issue. Yeah, I did. And where I went, the mainstream media followed, to be honest. And it is a huge issue. And this year, goodness only knows what the numbers will be, unless something really radical changes.
Well, how many are coming across, that we know of?
Well, the official figure last year was 28,400. That's across the channel.
Yeah.
In the back of lorries, about 9,000 that we know of. Likely with the lorries, a lot more than that came. With coming across the channel, I would think a few hundred would have escaped. I don't think it's more than that.
Oh, okay.
But it's a major issue. I've checked the figures. It's 87% young men, undocumented. Don't tell me these are refugees. This is part of a criminal trafficking trade, and it's getting these young men into Britain, many of whom will finish up in criminality. And many of whom will finish up in modern-day slavery. And no one seems to worry. No one seems to care.
Well, it's just perpetuated by the sort of useful idiots. I
believe that too. This year, is it going to be 50,000? Is it going to be 60,000? Is it going to be 7? I've no idea. It's going to be enormous, unless something radical happens. But I think we need Brexit 2.0. And I think Brexit 2.0 is we have to leave the European Court of Human Rights and completely change the incorporation of all of that into the Human Rights Act by Tony Blair in the late 1990s.
But who's going to do this? I mean, Jacob Rees-Mogg with the Brexit opportunity ministerial role he's got.
It's not for him to do.
Is Boris interested?
It's not for him to do, but I'm pleased that Jacob's got that job, by the way. Very pleased.
And you think he's going to do stuff? And
well,
he's actually going to...
I mean, for example...
Where's the Brexit dividend?
I mean, for example, well, it hasn't existed particularly, although in geopolitics it has, the AUKUS deal with Australia being a very good example, the vaccine rollout being a very good example. The fact we're the first out of all restrictions, Brussels would have said, please don't do this, had we still been members.
And we would have been subservient and had to listen to them, I presume.
A degree of cooperation with our European partners is the way they would have put it.
Yeah.
In many of the economic areas, no, but it is interesting. I mean, just a week into Jacob Rees-Mogg getting that job, we're now talking about radically reforming some of the directives that hang over the British insurance industry.
I've seen that.
Over capital. There's one little example of something where it does actually at last appear, we're having a proper conversation about it. So we need to crack on and do that. When it comes to, as I say, the European Court of Human Rights, European Convention, all of those things, this has to come from the Home Secretary. It has to come from Priti Patel, but it needs the boss to agree.
Is he interested?
No.
No. Is he interested in any of that stuff?
No.
Was it not just a platform to get elected?
He's a metropolitan Liberal. He is the metropolitan elite. When he was mayor of London, he even talked about amnesties for illegal immigrants. And for all those watching, who think, we shouldn't even be discussing this subject. What's really interesting,
we need to discuss.
But a really large number, increasing number of people and their families who've legally come to Britain and gone through the hoops and paid the money, they feel more strongly about this than you and I do.
Well, I talked to quite a few of them, and that's exactly what they say to me.
Yeah. We've got to get this right. Boris, all the while he's PM, I can't see it.
So, with a lot of these sort of issues, the mainstream media, the BBC, the Channel 4s, they're not going to want to cover it. You, I know, you've got GB News now, but prior to that, you were really into social media. I think you've said YouTube really pushed you on. How much has social media, YouTube provided the platform for you?
I'll tell you what, there was a period between 2004 and 2009, my second term in the European Parliament. There was a period in the middle of that, sort of 06-07, when I seriously considered packing it up. I seriously considered walking away because I wasn't making any impact. Getting on Question Time once a year just wasn't enough to make a serious impact. And then suddenly, YouTube arrives, the financial crisis of 2008 comes, and suddenly speeches I'm giving, because I'm by now a group leader in the European Parliament, and suddenly speeches I'm giving in the European Parliament are appearing on the laptops and dealer screens of traders sitting in the City of London. And that was because a firm called Zero Hedge, big financial markets website, had picked up on the stuff that I was talking about, had picked up on the crisis. We're turning these into YouTube films and putting them out. And by the time we got to Herman Van Rompuy and the charisma of a damp rag speech, YouTube was flying. And without it, to be honest, I could never have done a quarter of the things that I've done. So social media really was the way that all of this happened. There's no question about that. Equally for Trump in 2016, Twitter was his way of getting round the back of the New York Times and CNN and all of these people and reaching directly to vast numbers of people. But it is now those very social media companies who've now become tech giants on the most astonishing scale, who are now horrified by what their inventions have led to. I mean, democracy and free speech, very dangerous disease. Something's got to be done about it, clearly.
Well, they're controlling it all.
They are now so powerful.
They're cancelling.
They're now so powerful. And to think that Nick Clegg, is now in this position is almost beyond belief.
Head of policy, is he? Facebook?
Well, he isn't. I'm basically joint second equal in the whole shooting match. So it is disturbing. It is worrying. The fact that, whether you like Trump's style or not, but the fact that, he was banned from Twitter on the same day that Kabul fell and the leadership of the Taliban was still tweeting is one example of what's gone wrong. There are challenges.
And still tweeting now.
Yep.
And they're still live.
I know.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
You couldn't
the equivalents.
Couldn't invent
oh, Trump, the insurrection.
Yeah. We've got these
people's heads off.
We've got these challenges. We've got these challenges. Rumble. We've got these challenges. Parler. We've got these challenges. Getter. We've got these challenges. Trump's Truth Social. There are challenges now coming into the marketplace, but whether any of them are heavily capitalized enough to really take on the big companies, well, time will tell. I just don't know. But I'm deeply concerned about the impacts on free speech. And I think, really, during the pandemic, anybody that questioned lockdown policy, questioned jabs, by the way, 5th jab's on its way for the over 75s, 5th jab. But the autumn is on its way. You can make of that whatever you want to. But anybody that even questioned this stuff found themselves getting suspended, taken off. That is worrying.
The whole thing is bizarre. So, you know, I'm not suggesting that, you know, for one second that illegal immigration is the way forward. You know, we've just talked about all these people coming over the channel. We had a lot of legal migration prior to Brexit.
We still do.
That's interesting. However, let's say there are 30 million people in the employment market, around that figure in this country. According to the ONS, about 1.3 of them have gone. Now, lots have retired, lots have decided through the pandemic that they're not going to do it anymore. I guess some have gone home, you know, back to, I don't know, wherever they came from in the EU. What are we going to do to fill this big hole? You know, we've got a business. Let's say we're a small employer. Maybe we've got 70 staff. Wages are rising sharply. We cannot find the right people. We can't find marketing people. We can't find sales people. We can't find property managers. You know, we're having in our construction company, we're having problems finding, you know, labour on site. You know, I'm friends with a daffodil farmer. You know, and he used to get sort of a lot of EU migrants to pick his fields. He cannot get a sort of somebody, a native, an English person. He can't get one of them, even whilst offering them £400 a day to pick daffodils. He's had to let loads of them go to waste. How do we fix this? What do we do about this hole?
We can't go on relying on mass foreign labour. British population has risen by 8 million since 2000. 8 million. It's almost incomprehensible. And 84% of that is down to immigration.
So 15%.
Yeah, it's a big number. When it comes to getting GP appointments, when it comes to buying houses, when it comes to getting kids in primary schools, when it comes to, you know, why have they put smart motorways in? Because the 3-lane motorway with a hard shoulder can't cope with the number of cars on it. It's all this stuff. So the impact on our way of life has not been positive. It may well have been positive for many businesses, and it may well have been positive for many migrants who've come to Britain and done well, and good for them. But you can't have an unlimited flow of this. Look, I do think shortages of labour, shortages of materials, rising prices, this is part of the inflationary spiral that we're in. You know, we basically massively increased the money supply with the same amount of underlying product, and that does include labour.
We've also shut half of the productive capacity, you know, of you know, all the factories around the world, the offices, work from home. You know, there's all these a lot of these supply chains are broken. Cars, manufacturing. You know, that has to have an impact. But
look, it does. Of course, it does. But look, let me say this to you. You know, if you absolutely can't get daffodil pickers on the Scilly Isles or the west tip of Cornwall, Lincolnshire, fine. Right, I was miles out on that one. If you absolutely can't get them, then I've no objection to you being able to get work permit labour. But that means no social security benefits, no health benefits, that must all be covered. And if it's a strict contract for 6 months or whatever it is, that's fine. If we absolutely need foreign labour, but I do think there are 2 things we need to do in this country, and they're both difficult. The first is we need to have a different conversation with young people about what they do with their lives aged 18. I have been a constant critic of this move just to send more and more young people to universities.
Tony Blair.
Yeah, and supported by the Conservatives.
50%.
All the way through. All the way through. And so a large number of youngsters in their middle, late 20s feel horrendously let down by being promised this was the ticket to a great job and a great life. And in many cases, it simply hasn't been. So a reorientation towards trades, skills, jobs, you know, things like that would be really important. Take engineering for argument's sake. Quite difficult to run an engineering firm on British labour. I get it. I do get the point you're making because we've de-skilled. We've de-skilled. We went for mass imported foreign labour. We drove wages down to the floor. The minimum wage in a lot of jobs became the maximum wage. And with that driving down of wages came a driving down of productivity. Our productivity fell below that of France, and de-skilling. We have got this all completely and utterly wrong over 20 years. So a sense of reorientation of where young people go and what the merits of university education are. And that can be done. The second one is much harder. I don't get it. But there seem to be a very large number, significant minority of young people that don't want to work, that don't have material ambitions, that don't want to have a car. I want to have a car. I'm 18, 19, I want to have a car. I want to go to work and have money and have a car. I want to buy some nice clothes, whatever it may be.
But what about your mental health?
Oh, gosh.
What about work from home?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm probably the wrong witness on some of this stuff. But no, but I don't get it. And I do talk to young people.
It's confusing, isn't it?
I talk to young people, and they want to be happy. Mm-hmm. And they think a 4-day week maximum is a great idea.
But doesn't that sort of stem from fulfilment or from achievement?
Well, that's an incredibly old-fashioned idea. You're clearly a dinosaur. Look, I mean, of course, there are different types in life, and there have always been, the hippie type, if you like, who's happy, dropping out, not doing too much, and that's fine. If that's what they want to do and they're not causing harm to anybody, that's fine. But I do think there's a significant minority of young people who just do not have that work ethic, do not have the ambition to get on, and that's a huge cultural thing. And quite what we're going to do about that, I just don't know. I guess one thing we can do, I probably should wash my mouth out with soap and water after this, but is make it much more difficult to get benefits if people who are able-bodied and minded don't want to work. But can you imagine?
Oh.
Can you imagine the uproar if anybody tried?
This is going to lead somewhere, isn't it? Wages probably haven't risen at the right rate for a long time, for a significant period, and productivity's dropped. I mean, and
that really worries me.
Maybe there's a few reasons for that. Maybe there's been a lack of investment in mechanisation and technology and all that sort of stuff. But yes, cheap labour coming in will be a big factor. But at the end of all this, industry is going to keep pushing the government, big business, the corporates. In the end, the pressure is going to build and build. They're already talking to India about, giving sort of special visas. Something is going to give, and we're probably going to end up taking a lot of people from something. Now, fine, if they're on Dubai, they sort of ship them in. They're on a visa.
Yeah, I mean,
and then
Is that? I think we need
to.
I think we need to sort of think about different compartments here. One compartment are work visas, and that is what they should be, not permanent tickets to remain.
Yeah.
The second are those who legally want to come and settle, sometimes with families, and that's great.
Yeah.
And the fact we're going to have a non-discriminatory policy now, namely, we won't favour EU citizens over Indians or Canadians or whatever it may be. Or
Australians.
Or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Is good. And thirdly, it is what is a refugee and what is somebody gaming the system. So they're the three areas, and they're very important. We've got to get them right. We will need to use work permits in the short term. Clearly, your daffodil mate in Lincolnshire, is it 400 quid a day?
400. That's what he's trying to pay people. And he can't get them to pull it out of the ground.
I'll find him a couple of people, don't worry about that.
We've had problems with brickies at $3.50 a day.
Yeah.
I mean, it's getting easier now, but during sort of the lockdowns, obviously materials were tough.
It's actually been a very good time for tradesmen and women, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been brilliant.
For
them, it's been brilliant.
I mean, if that's not an example,
the brickies, the roofers.
If that's not an example to lots of young people that actually getting a skill that lasts you through your working life can be a great ticket, I don't know what is.
So, the Irish, Nice, Lisbon, they rejected both, but sort of later on, I think they went for Lisbon. You went to Ireland. How much do you think the presence of an Englishman had on that sort of final result?
So, here's a story for you. So, the Constitution, this was the EU Constitution, right? That's what it was called. Valéry Giscard d'Estaing drew it up, and the French had a referendum on it. And guess what they said? No. The Dutch had a referendum on it. And guess what they said? No. And I reckon most countries in the European Union would have said no. So they repackaged it as the Lisbon Treaty. They even boasted that by calling it a treaty, not a constitution, it would avoid referendums, apart from Ireland, who voted no. I was involved in that first referendum. I was involved in the support and to some extent production of a little booklet that went to every household in Ireland through the Irish equivalent of the post office. And the day the Irish voted no to Lisbon, the Taoiseach got up and said, Nigel Farage has hijacked Irish democracy. And I thought, and then Lisbon 2...
Was it helpful?
Oh,
having you there?
Look, Lisbon 2, by the time Lisbon 2 came, there was no tolerance. They were going to win that referendum. It didn't matter what they had to do. There was literally no media balance of any kind at all. And it was pretty tough, but fine, they got it through second time, but what legitimacy? What legitimacy does it have? And then they thought, with their friends here, that they could do the same to us. And we've held out.
I didn't think it ever happened. I wasn't for Brexit. You know,
No.
I'm a Remainer. Your other views, I'm completely on board with. But the economics, the sort of trade, and I think for you it's maybe more. There are other. There are maybe the economics is secondary.
Of course, there are bigger factors. I mean, the right to govern yourself, the right to live in a system that you can call democratic, I think is absolutely fundamental. We won't dwell on it, but all I would say to you on the economics is this. The Eurozone is 15% of global GDP. It'll be 14% next year. Yeah. By 2030, it'll be lucky to be 7 or 8%. It is a diminishing, declining, little backyard.
No, it was getting smaller.
Oh, that's absolutely. Yeah, it has been. In fact, when we joined...
Why is that? I don't... because they're not all in recession, those economies.
Two reasons. Countries like Italy... I mean, just look at the decline, the level of economic decline in Italy. Look at the level of economic decline in Greece.
But surely their GDP is growing, but just more slowly than...
Hasn't grown for 20 years.
Has it not? Italian GDP has
not grown for 20 years.
That's fascinating.
And Greece's is down 25% since 2008.
Is it really?
Yeah. And you can see, even Germany now looks vulnerable as we go ahead. Germany, which was this great sort of post-war modern industrial country, begins to look a bit out of date. When you look at investment in tech, just for example, we are getting the lion's share, massively the lion's share of tech investment this side of the year.
Why do you think that is? I mean, you've got the Anglo sort of
their models are out of date. They're out of date. The thinking's out of date.
Language, time zone.
Language doesn't help them. Language doesn't help them as English increasingly becomes the dominant global. Well, it could be Mandarin soon, but for now, we have a huge advantage with that. They're falling behind. So look, the world's changing. Plus, you've got this massive transference of wealth, money, power, and influence from west to east that is going on. Now, some of it's worrying, but it is going on. So the world's changing very, very quickly indeed. Even places like South America, where economies are so much bigger than they were 2-3 decades ago. So I think outside the European Union, economically, we're in a much better position to be flexible and adaptable to some of those changes.
Well, let's hope that, Jacob really sort of...
Well, but you know what, ultimately...
this.
Ultimately with Brexit, I said this all the way through, my entirety of my career, and through the referendum, and I never ever wavered on this. I never said that Brexit was a guarantee of a land of milk and honey. What I did say was our destiny would be on our own hands, and that I thought we had a better chance of getting it right for ourselves than big decisions being taken by someone you can't vote for and can't remove on behalf of 28.
So we all love the Queen.
We do.
What do we make of this whole sort of Prince Andrew stuff?
Oh, dear Lord.
Obviously the interview was, that went wrong. What do we make of it all?
He should have stayed in the Navy. I mean, it's 40 years since the Falklands, where he did actually serve with distinction.
Yeah.
in a genuinely dangerous position.
Helicopter pilot?
He was. He should have stayed in the Navy. Look, there are just a multitude of problems, aren't there? I mean, there's the Prince Andrew stuff. He settled out of court with her. We'll never know the truth of this. I think he was right to settle out of court. I think even if he was completely innocent, I just think, you know, having a fight with a chimney sweep, you get covered in soot. I just think it would have been a disaster. Yeah. So he is out of the game. Harry, willfully as willfully destructive towards the royal family as he possibly can be.
Bizarre, isn't it?
Just awful, selfish, ghastly, awful. I mean, she'll drop him, obviously, Meghan, at some point. You know, once he's been used fully for what she wants.
It's almost like she's just. You know, he's pussy whipped.
It's painful.
It's pussy whipped.
It's painful to watch. You can use your own terminology. I won't agree with it. It was, as my friend Donald Trump says, when asked about this, I wish Harry all the luck in the world. He's going to need it. Yeah. You know? And then you've got Charles. I'm just not sure he's going to connect as monarch. I mean, I don't doubt his sincerity. I've met him a couple of times, and I've sat in rooms where he's been speaking. I remember once he got a standing ovation in the European Parliament, and I sat there with my arms folded, and they all thought I was a Republican. I'm not. But I worry about Charles. I worry about his overt political levels of interference that we've seen over decades. It looks like, you know, William and Kate are the perfect. Looks like they're the perfect couple.
They're certainly working the media in the right way.
And she's got amazing charm and grace the way she carries herself.
He picked the right one, didn't he? I mean, what a contrast.
It does look like it.
What a contrast.
And as for the Queen, well, her mother lived to 101. And her mother did not exactly live the healthiest of lifestyles. I mean, she lived to the full. So let's hope the Queen goes on a lot longer than that.
Hear to that. Boris, proper beat in the last few months. Partygate. I wouldn't be one for arguing that those who set the rules shouldn't follow them. It'd be rather hypocritical, wouldn't it? But doesn't Boris bashing sort of leave us at risk? Don't we have to be careful what we wish for? I remember there was a time with Theresa May where, you know, she's studious, she's I'm sure very hardworking. I'm sure she reads all the briefs that Boris doesn't. And in many ways, she maybe she was better than him. I know we'd all like to forget about what happened just around that sort of Brexit period because she probably didn't do a great job. But in the end, he won this election because he's charismatic. You call him a cheerleader, and I don't know what happens. He goes.
No, you're quite right. You're quite right.
Liz Truss.
No, you're quite right.
I've seen her twice.
No, let's keep Boris there. Let's make the state bigger. Let's put taxes up. Let's reduce incentives. Let's go for net zero. Deindustrialise the whole of Britain. Anything else? I mean, how is this guy even vaguely conservative? What connection does Boris have to any self-employed small business man or woman in this country?
We have a similar opinion, but what is the alternative?
I don't know.
I mean, Corbyn
I don't know.
He was within a cat's whisker of
not quite.
Theresa. Well, I mean, Theresa May.
I mean, she was so useless.
She was.
She was so useless
because she didn't have that popularity. Maybe is Rishi going to?
Well, Rishi would be.
What's going to happen there?
Rishi would be even more of a social democrat than Boris.
Well, this is the problem. So what do you end up with?
In 1975, Airy Neve, very distinguished man, captured by the Germans at Dunkirk, Calais actually, escaped from Dunkirk, escaped from Colditz, did a home run from Colditz. Quite a bloke. Airy Neve was going around the House of Commons in 1975 saying, please sign this piece of paper for Margaret, because if you don't, there won't be a contest against Ted Heath. And from nowhere, on power of argument, she came through and won the contest. Who would have thought little John Major would have won when we had the contest in 1990? I certainly didn't believe that he would, and he did. In 2005, the bookmakers had stopped taking money on David Davis. He was that far heavily odds-on to beat David Cameron. And yet one speech, everything changed. So it's not obvious at the moment who the cheerleader would be. What I can tell you is when the contest comes, and Boris will not lead them into the next election.
No.
That isn't going to happen. What I can tell you is the next leadership election within the Conservative Party is going to be a sort of existential battle. Is it going to become a Conservative Party in the sense that, you know, it really believes in free market economics as opposed to global corporatism, which I think is sort of, to me, at the core, because if you believe in the free market economics and you believe that small guys and small women are actually rather important to build momentum, and you believe in the freedom and supply side reforms that allow them, it actually leads to almost everything else that goes on.
Sort of Thatcherite thinking.
It's a Thatcherite, Reaganite type of thinking. Or it becomes a Social Democrat Party. And it becomes a Social Democrat Party, which it has become.
Is that because, are they not a product of their own environment? Is that not because...
To some extent, we're back to where I was. To some extent, we're back to where to where we were earlier. You know, a group of journalists and politicians.
The group think.
Yeah, very much so. And if we finish up with a Social Democrat leader of the Conservative Party, who in policy... I mean, can you believe Keir Starmer's now talking about cutting taxes? Labour are the party of low taxes. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up.
Some taxes, and
So,
then...
but
and then he's
we
talking
could
about-
finish up where we were. You know, I stood as leader of UKIP against Miliband, Clegg and Cameron in 2015. There were no policy differences between them. Oh, they pretended there were. But frankly, there were no fundamental policy differences between them at all. And the danger is we go back to that kind of politics. The danger is that Brexit, which we hoped and believed, many of us, would bring a new kind of politics, actually takes us back to exactly where we were before. You know, a sort of just too many people who are too privileged, who are too part of this whole Oxbridge, London bubble. And if we go back to that, then there'll be mass abstentionism. Mass abstentionism, and maybe there'll be another insurgency. Maybe it'll be reform. Maybe it'll be somebody else. I don't know, but it would happen.
Scary times. Putin.
I think it's less scary in this country than it is in many other parts of the world. And I think, you know what, however badly it appears we're run at times, however little we've taken advantage of what Brexit can do for us, we're still getting some big things right. And there are still, on the other side of the coin, to those that don't want to work and haven't got ambition, lots of young kids who are entrepreneurial. So it's not all bad news.
So on to Putin. He's rolled his tanks into eastern Ukraine, I think, overnight. Where is this going? Is he going to go all the way into Ukraine? Does he stop there, or has he got sort of?
Well, you know, where's
Finland?
Where's our red line? Is this the 1930s? Is this
Munich?
Sudetenland type stuff? Is this, well, you know, Hitler said they're German, that they are Germanic, German-speaking peoples, and that's exactly what Putin is saying about these provinces. Although it is actually true in the case of these provinces. You know, I mean, actually, since 2014, a lot of the Ukrainian speakers have left.
He sort of engineered it.
Well, you know, how much pressure was put upon them to do so? I just don't know. I really don't know the answer to that. I think the West got a real problem. You know, I mean, he clearly believes in Greater Russia. He clearly believes that the breakup of the Soviet Union happened too quickly. And there are clearly quite a lot of people in some of these states who feel the same way, that Mother Russia.
The empire.
All that stuff. And I don't know what we're going to do.
This could turn into a major insurgency, though. I mean, it could be their Afghanistan. You know,
He's too clever for that.
The Americans could be arming them.
He's too clever for that. Hence what I said a moment ago.
Sort of worked it up.
We must decide what's our red line.
It's almost like a drop close, isn't it? He's set the expectation there. He's gone in here.
Yeah. No, that's what he's doing. Where does it end? I don't know. I just don't know. And we don't know. I do think we've made some terrible mistakes. I do think we've aided and abetted his campaign. I think the ever-westward expansion of the EU and NATO has been a big mistake, and I thought that for 30 years. But where we are right now, you know, given that we've done that already, where we are right now, where do we draw our red line? There are, I have to say, there are echoes of 30s comparisons that are They're only comparisons. It's not a piece of tracing paper. But I'm concerned. But the Germans, who I thought really were the ones that were holding back any sense of Western solidarity, have announced an end to Nord Stream 2. We'll have to watch it.
They're going to have to reduce their dependency on Russian oil and gas, aren't they? And they're going to
have to start mining coal again, in quite a big way, I'd have thought. So we'll see. Putin is not a great guy. I'm not a supporter, but you have to say he does play this geopolitics very cleverly.
So you've mentioned first past the post and the problems with it in terms of you becoming our Prime Minister.
Oh yeah. Well, it's not just that. It's no open primaries. In America, anyone can stand to be the president on a Democrat ticket or a Republican ticket, and if they get through, they can become president. Here, it's a closed shop.
Would you ever try again? Would you ever sort of try and become an MP?
Well, do you know what?
Is it worth it?
I did 20 years and 7 months in the European Parliament. I was fortunate that for nearly 15 of those years, I had a seat on the front row, a position of prominence, speaking time in all the big debates. I mean, you couldn't have scripted it better for me. And seat number 20, with Juncker in seat 21, just over the corridor. I mean, you couldn't have scripted it. What can I do as an MP? Maybe get up in PMQs twice a year and ask a question from the backbenchers.
You could do quite a lot as a Prime Minister.
Oh yeah, but that's just not going to happen. We're not America. It isn't going to happen.
But what happened with the Brexit Party? And there were moments, were there not?
Oh, there were. I mean, look, in June 2019, for 5 weeks in a row, the Brexit Party topped the opinion polls for the next general election. But then, the gap was there. Boris filled it, and people were happy to go back to where they were because that's what first past the post politics does. It's tribal kind of politics. So I think I can achieve more through media, through social media, through conversations like this, through campaigns, be it on net zero and going out around the country and doing things. I think I can achieve more in terms of shifting perception, moving arguments on, getting change. As the radical that I am, I think I can get more done that way than by sitting as an MP.
And I suppose less chance of having drugs planted in your pocket.
I'm not sure Westminster would be quite as brutal as that, but maybe it would. I don't know. 20 years and 7 months as an MEP. I think I've done my time.
Good innings.
Yeah.
So I grew up in a dictatorship in the Far East. My father used to say he had 30 years living as an expatriate in all these different places. And he came back when he was 60, and he used to say to me, in this country, I feel less free and less able to do and say what I please versus, let's say he lived in 15 dictatorships, in Asia and Africa and all that sort of stuff. Most of us can't say what we're thinking, and it does feel like the PC brigade and the wokists have won. Surely, at some point, there has to be a major rowing back so that, freedom of speech trumps this stuff because it is being ebbed away. They are chipping away at it and they're succeeding.
Pendulums go back and forth. And we can go to 1658, where the overt celebration of Christmas could lead to imprisonment, to Hogarth's Gin Lane. A few decades later, social pendulums can go back and forth. I do think, this battle, the things you're talking about, I think this is a battle for Western civilization. It's a battle for everything. It's a battle for the values upon which our countries were built, a battle for all that was expended to defend those things, and they are deliberately under attack. It's a real concern. And the march through the institutions of the cultural Marxists. These are real issues, real battles. But when it comes to all of this, we're very reliant on America. Where America goes with this stuff is where we're going to go.
Freedom of speech is enshrined in
the
their
Constitution.
In the Constitution. Yeah. So it is a little bit different there, isn't it? Here you can be prosecuted for...
Yes.
And look, there are lots of things we don't want. sort of people saying and
but
inciting.
But I do think in terms of tearing down statues, rewriting history, self-loathing, all of these things, I do think winning the battle in America is absolutely key. Absolutely key.
So when does this happen?
Something in me senses it's happening already. I think there is a silent majority waking up to the fact that this stuff is just crazy. I think a swimmer, who was a man, identifies as a woman, who's just winning everything. People say, well, hang on, how's that fair to female athletes? I mean, so I think these debates are happening. They are happening, but the biggest worry of all are the educational establishments across the Western world, and that's where government's going to need to be very brave, and very radical, and we're going to have to get back to critical thinking and making people understand there are two sides to every argument.
They're so, students are so, they're like sponges. And I remember when I was at university, I'd have lots of sort of sandal-wearing, Guardian-reading lecturers, especially in my sociology, lectures, that they had some really strong views. And, I was probably, young enough and impressionable enough to sort of take that on board. And, I mean, should there not be some form of, legislation or control?
We have to make sure. We have to make sure. I mean, there has been talk in the last couple of weeks from the government about this, but talk's cheap. Actions are tougher, and you've got unions to fight and many other things. It needs something very brave and very radical, not just here, but across much of the Western world.
So, we're entrepreneurs. Do you feel like we are fairly treated as small business owners in the United Kingdom by the government?
You're what?
Entrepreneurs, small business owners?
I've never heard of it. No, I don't know what you're talking about. Do you mean you work for GlaxoSmithKline or the European Commission, or you're a civil servant? Or if not, do not compute. You guys have no voice in Westminster. There is no representation for small business, for entrepreneurship. I talked to you earlier on in this interview about the disconnect between those that govern us and the real world out of the country. People like you going out, taking risk, hopefully doing well and making money. I really hope you are, because if you are, you're employing people and paying taxes. I'm very for both of those things. No, there is no comprehension, no understanding. We're living in an age of corporatism. When the left condemn capitalism, there isn't any. This is corporatism. And this is something that we really do need to get right. And that's why the next Conservative leadership election, the question you've just asked me, will be at the very front and centre of much of this. And the right candidate needs to emerge that understands people like you.
But are the public, are they that bothered? The general public don't seem that bothered about this as an issue. Surely.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that.
Surely the whole private
There are
sector.
5.5 million people, right? 5.5 million people out there who are running small companies as directors, limited companies, acting as sole traders. It's a lot of people. And if you add to that, a lot of them will have partners. A lot of them will have a parent or two parents still alive. So quite a lot of them will have kids. You actually start to think about all of that, and you realise 15 to 20 million people are acutely aware of what you're talking about.
A third plus of the population.
It is a significant amount.
Yeah.
It is a significant amount, and it just doesn't have the collective voice. The Federation of Small Businesses, I used to get on very well with. I feel they've been corporatised. Just not fighting and standing up as tough as they should. But, leaders can change and things can change. But on those front benches in the House of Commons, you have a look. There are no small business entrepreneurs there. None.
Some of the backbenchers, maybe.
There are some backbenchers, definitely.
You have them on the show, I see sometimes.
No, of course. And it's a joy.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things...
They're smart people.
One of the things I've tried to do in GB News with that Talking Pint segment at the end is to get people who've come from nothing and been successes. And one of the reasons I love those stories is I hope that's an inspiration to others, that nothing is too difficult, nothing is insurmountable. You just need ambition, belief, optimism.
Rocco 40,
And
Sorrel.
luck. And luck.
Yeah.
And luck as well.
You make your own luck.
Well, that was the Gary Playerism, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Gee, you're lucky, Gary. It's funny, Sonny. The more I practice, the luckier I get. I still think you do need a bit of luck in life. Of course you do. We're all lucky to be here.
Could be in Africa without running water.
Well, we could be, or in my case, dead from aeroplane crashes and car crashes,
You've
a bit
of that, haven't you?
there is a lot. I mean, there is a lot of luck in life. You've got to be capable, but there is a bit of luck in life.
Yeah.
But it's that inspiration that people need.
And I just find it bizarre that, the whole private sector, corporates as well, pay for the public sector. The money doesn't come anywhere else unless you print it.
Oh, but I thought modern monetary theory was in play now.
What, monetary financing, like they tried in the Weimar Republic.
It's nuts.
It is nuts, and there's not even any gratitude. It's just sort of they're our masters, and we just have to go along with all of this. And at some point it might
needs
change.
a redress.
So we all love investment. We love property. We love investing in sort of equities. And I know you used to be on an exchange, on the commodities exchange.
Yeah.
What do you really enjoy investing in? Away from the sort of normal stuff.
I mean, so one of the things that I did is I put all my pensions and just gave it to put it into very reputable companies to look after for me, and went away for 20 years and did politics, and came back and thought, well, okay, these returns are all right. You just look at the compounded fees the industry takes, you realise how tough it is. So one of my projects has been getting involved with a daily email called Fortune and Freedom, and people subscribe to that, and we're giving people ideas, not saying buy this, sell this, it'll make you a fortune, but here are ways you can become more self-reliant. So the first thing I would say is people need to be more self-reliant, more in control of their own money and their own financial destiny. I think that's really, really important. I think, look, property, I mean, it's had the most amazing run. And in terms of where we are now, I mentioned the 8 million figure to you earlier. The population's exploding. We do not even build enough. We need to build, this is a 3-year-old figure, right? I don't know what it is now with the pandemic. But looking at the numbers 3 years ago, we need to build a new dwelling every 4 minutes just to cope with the rate of immigration into Britain. Just think about that. So we don't build enough houses to keep up with the current level of demand, let alone the massive backlog we've got. So I think property will be stable, strong, until and if we get some sort of horrendous big debt crisis, inflation, interest rate. So the warning signs are there. The warning, for the first time in years, the warning signs are there. I don't think inflation's going away in a hurry. I think inflation is a disease of money that is caused by government, and it's much harder to fix than people realise. And I think gold, I know this is not an investment podcast, and we must be slightly careful what we say, but I think gold has traditionally been the great hedge in times of economic worry, and indeed, perhaps military worry. Although I don't think that's going to go further for now. And of course, there's a whole space of crypto, which is just so volatile, it's almost untrue. You look at these coins, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and I mentioned them because they're quite liquid compared to many of the others. And they double, they halve, but they're gaining much wider acceptance across America. They're being used for more and more things. And I still think they've got a great future. I really do. I think they've got a great future. And for safer investments, look, we've had ridiculous rises on the stock market year after year after year, particularly the NASDAQ stocks and the tech sector. And many of these firms not returning profits, a lot of it on borrowed money, massive multiples, completely bonkers. And we're beginning to see 1 or 2 crashes in some of those companies. What will happen if we get a major stock market sell-off is exactly what has happened in previous stock market downturns. That is the flight to quality. And there'll be a flight to quality, and quality are companies that make products that people buy, and in most cases are bought for many, many years. Quality of firms that don't have big levels of debt. Quality of firms that pay solid dividends, which if investors reinvest, do well. And one last point, because of ESG investing, trendy investing,
There's an opportunity.
There are lots of firms, because their products are not liked, because they might be in minerals,
British American tobacco.
And actually these look like very, very many of these.
The
I'm not going to be specific.
The yields.
I'm being non-specific. But the yields are phenomenal, and a lot of these look like very, very good investments. So I think there are always opportunities out there. Always opportunities out there. But the real bugbear is going to be inflation. How long it stays and what government has to do to tackle it.
But if factories have been shut and the service sector's been shut and you've got huge swathes of people that have not been active economically and they're still fixing these supply chains, you go and try and buy sort of luxury watches, they haven't got them, cars, they haven't got them. That is a supply side shock. That is going to create inflation inevitably, surely. Now I know we can get into this cycle and wages are going up. But that has still got to feed its way through the system, hasn't it? This, supply side.
Oh, this is not over.
But once supply really gets going.
No, I think inflation will be a lot higher than most people think it's going to be.
You think it will be?
I think it's here for
sort
longer.
Of endemic,
I think it's here for much longer than people.
Yeah. So next year it's not hitting 7%, or this year 7% and coming off. Or?
All those that denied it, including the Bank of England and the Prime Minister, who said it wasn't going to happen, and even in October said it wasn't going to be a problem, now say, don't worry, in the last 6 months of this year, it'll disappear. It won't.
Very interesting, because that's going to have big consequences, surely. Because if inflation stays above 5% at some point, they're not going. We're not going to have base at 1.5. I think that's the markets. If you look at the markets at the moment, they maybe 10 years 1.55 this morning, something like that, and they may be expecting, terminal interest rate, base rate at 1.6, something like that. It's not going to be that. It's going to be 5, 6, 7. Well, what happens to all of these people who've sort of borrowed money on that?
Well, and that's why actually
economic activity will fall off a cliff.
Of course it will, and that's why probably interest rates won't rise as much as they should to deal with the problem.
So what happened?
Inflation stays with us longer and goes higher.
So they keep writing a letter to the governor of the Bank of England. To the chancellor. They leave it and they sort of say, well, there are other factors and that's it. And you think they'll have to do that?
That's what I think.
Yeah, they'll inflate the debt away.
Helps them.
Certainly does, doesn't
Suits
it?
them.
It's interesting, isn't it? So, final question. How will history judge you, Mr. Farage?
Oh, gosh. Well, Michael Crick's tried to do that in his book, but I haven't read it. But I hope that history will judge me as somebody who had a very passionate belief, fought fanatically for it for nearly 3 decades, and against all the odds, won. And they'll say that, he was outspoken, and he wasn't everyone's cup of tea. And I guess that's what they're going to say.
Amen to that. Thank you very much, Nigel.
Thank you.
I have thoroughly enjoyed that. It's been one of my favourite interviews. That has been Mark Homer, over and out. Now, what did you think about that? Really interesting having Mr. Farage on, wasn't it? What did you think about that interview? Why don't you put your comments below? I've been Mark Homer. Make sure you like and subscribe. Over and out.
If you want to hear more from Mark and Nigel and watch the deleted scenes from this interview, head to rob.team. The link is in the description.